I saw myself in her eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't recognize the person staring back. The coffee shop smelled of burnt espresso and broken dreams. I sat in the corner booth, the same one where Elena and I had our first date. 7 years ago, watching her fingers trace the rim of her untouched latte. The silence between us had grown so thick I could taste it, metallic and bitter, like the aftermath of a lie. "You're not saying anything," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the grinding of coffee beans and the casual chatter of people whose lives weren't imploding. I couldn't speak because every word I'd prepared had evaporated the moment she walked in. She looked different, not physically, but something in her posture, the way she held herself. There was a confidence there that hadn't existed when she left our apartment this morning, a glow that made my stomach turn because I knew I wasn't its source. The phone call, I finally managed. "Last night, you said it was Rebecca." Elena's hand stilled on her cup. A micro-expression flickered across her face. Beer, maybe relief. It was Rebecca. Rebecca doesn't have a deep voice, and definitely doesn't call you baby before hanging up when I answer. The words hung between us like a blade. I watched, her face carefully, cataloging every twitch, every breath. In my work as a forensic psychologist, I'd learned to read people's tells, to spot the moments when truth wrestled with deception. My wife had become a case study. "James, I don't." I held up my hand. "Don't make it worse with another lie." She looked down at her hands, and I noticed she'd removed her wedding ring. The pale band of skin where it used to rest seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights. When had she taken it off? This morning, yesterday, last week? How long had I been living with a stranger? When did it start? I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Inside, I felt like I was watching myself from a distance, like I was observing someone else's life fall apart. "James, please, we don't have to do this here. When did it start, Elena?" She looked up at me then, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Pity. She pitied me. The realization hit harder than any confession could have. 3 months ago, she said, quietly, 3 months. I ran through the timeline in my head. 3 months ago was when she started working late, when she began going to yoga classes that apparently didn't exist, when she started showering immediately after coming home, when our conversations became polite exchanges between roommates rather than intimate talks between lovers. Who is he? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. She exhaled slowly, like she was releasing 7 years of marriage in one breath. Thomas, from work. Thomas. I knew Thomas. He was the new marketing director, 10 years younger than me, with the kind of easy charm that made everyone gravitate toward him at office parties. I'd shaken his hand at the company Christmas party, had even laughed at his jokes. The irony was so sharp, it cut. "Are you in love with him?" The question surprised us both. It wasn't what I'd planned to ask, but it was the only question that mattered. Everything else, the how, the where, the when, was just noise. This was the only truth that would determine what came next. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." I studied her face. This woman I'd loved for 7 years, married for 5, built a life with. She looked like Elena, sounded like Elena, but the person sitting across from me was a stranger. When had we become strangers to each other? "Why?" I asked. "What did I do wrong?" "You didn't do anything wrong, James. That's the problem. I don't understand." She leaned forward, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with. "You're a good man, a good husband. You pay the bills, you remember anniversaries, you never raise your voice. You're perfect." How is that a problem? Because perfect is boring. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for months. Perfect is predictable. Perfect is coming home to the same conversation every night, the same routine, the same ... Everything perfect is slow death by 1,000 small comforts. I felt something crack inside my chest. "So you decided to have an affair?" I decided to feel alive again. The honesty in her voice was devastating. I'd spent weeks preparing for anger, for denials, for tears and apologies. I hadn't prepared for this, for the revelation that our marriage hadn't been destroyed by any grand betrayal, but by the slow erosion of passion, of surprise, of the very things that had brought us together in the first place. "Do you remember?" Elena said. her voice softer now when we first met. "You were this intense, complicated person. You had opinions about everything. You'd stay up all night talking about philosophy and psychology and your dreams of changing the world. When did you stop having dreams, James?" I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. When had I stopped having dreams? When had I settled for contentment instead of happiness? When had I become the kind of man who came home, ate dinner, watched television, and went to bed without ever really living? "I thought we were happy," I said. "We were comfortable. There's a difference. And now I don't know what I want. Thomas makes me feel like I did when I was 25, like anything is possible. Like I'm not just some middle-aged woman counting down the days until retirement. You're 32, Elena, hardly middle-aged." That's not the point. She was, right? It wasn't the point. The point was that somewhere along the way, we'd stopped seeing each other. We'd become roommates going through the motions of marriage without any of the passion or connection that had made us fall in love in the first place. "What happens now?" I asked. "I don't know. Are you leaving me?" "I don't know. Are you going to keep seeing him?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I found my answer. "I see, James. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything right now, but I am sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did want to fuck him." The crudeness of my words made her flinch, but I was past caring about politeness. The gloves were off now, and if we were going to destroy our marriage, we might as well do it honestly. "Yes," she said quietly, "I did." The admission hung between us like a confession at a funeral. I felt something die inside me, but also something else, a strange sense of relief. The uncertainty was over. The truth, however brutal, was finally out in the open. "I need time," I said, standing up. "I need time to think." "Where are you going?" "I don't know. Somewhere else. Anywhere else." I left her sitting there, still tracing the rim of her untouched latte, still looking like the woman I'd loved, but no longer was. The cold October air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside, and for the first time in months, I felt awake. My phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "I'm sorry I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. Sorry wasn't going to fix this. Sorry wasn't going to undo 3 months of lies. Sorry wasn't going to make me trust her again, but maybe." I thought as I walked through the darkening streets of our neighborhood. Sorry was a place to start. The house felt different when I returned that evening. Elena's car wasn't in the driveway, and the silence inside was absolute. No television, murmuring in the background, no sound of her moving around upstairs, no life. Just silence, and the weight of 7 years of shared memories pressing down on me from every corner. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my study. Surrounded by my books on psychology and human behavior, the irony wasn't lost on my spent my days analyzing the breakdown of other people's relationships, understanding the psychological patterns that led to betrayal and divorce, and yet I'd been blindsided by the collapse of my own marriage. Had I missed the signs? In retrospect, they seemed obvious. The distance, the scheduled changes, the way she'd started dressing differently, caring more about her appearance, the way she'd stopped asking about my day, stopped sharing details about hers, the gradual shift from we to I in her conversations. I'd been a forensic psychologist for 12 years. I'd analyzed hundreds of cases involving deception, betrayal, and the psychological factors that drove people to destroy their relationships. And yet, when it came to my own life, I'd been as blind as any victim. The bourbon burned as it went down, but it was a good burn. It was real. Everything else in my life felt like an illusion now, but the bourbon was honest. It didn't pretend to be something at WASN. Single quotes, T. My phone rang. Elena, I let it go to voicemail, then played the message. "James, I'm staying at Rebecca's tonight. We need to talk, but not today. I need time to. I'm sorry. I love you. I know you don't believe that right now, but I do love you." Love? What did that word even mean anymore? I'd thought I understood love. I thought Elena and I had it. But if love could coexist with betrayal, if love could drive someone into another person's arms, then maybe I'd never understood anything at all. I was 42 years old, and for the first time since I was a teenager, I had no idea what I was supposed to do next. I woke up on the couch at 3 a.m. with a crick in my neck and the taste of bourbon coating my tongue like regret. The house was still empty, still silent, but something had shifted. In my dreams, I'd been back in graduate school, young and hungry, and certain that I could decode the mysteries of human behavior. I'd been passionate about understanding why people hurt each other, why they made the choices that destroyed their lives. When had I stopped being that person? I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table where Elena and I had shared thousands of meals, thousands of conversations. The morning light filtered through the windows she'd insisted on keeping bare because she liked the way it made the room feel. Open now, it just felt exposed. My phone had 7 missed calls from Elena and 3 from my brother Michael. I ignored them all and called in sick to work. Dr. Harrison would understand he'd been through his own divorce 5 years ago. The irony of a forensic psychologist needing a mental health day wasn't lost on me. I spent the morning walking through our neighborhood, really seeing it for the first time in years. The Hendersons had painted their house blue. The old oak tree on Maple Street had finally been cut down. Mrs. Chen had planted roses where her husband's vegetable garden used to be before he died last spring. Life had been happening all around me while I'd been sleepwalking through my own existence at the park where Elena and I used to jog together. I sat on a bench and tried to piece together the timeline of our relationship's decay. When had we stopped jogging together become a perfunctory question instead of genuine interest? 2 years ago, I realized, the change had started 2 years ago when I'd taken the promotion to senior analyst, more money, more responsibility, more hours at the office. I'd thought I was building our future, securing our stability. But somewhere in all that building and securing, I'd forgotten to live. A woman jogged past with her dog, and for a moment, I thought it was Elena, same height, same dark hair, pulled back in a ponytail. But when she turned, the face was different, younger. Everything reminded me of Elena now, but nothing was actually her. My phone rang. "Michael again, you sound like shit," he said when I answered. "Feel like it too," Elena called me. "She's worried." "About you, she's worried about me." The laugh that came out of my throat was harsh. "That's rich. James, I know you're hurting, but do you? Do you know what it feels like to discover that your wife has been fucking someone else for 3 months? Do you know what it feels like to realize that you've been living a lie?" Silence on the other end of the line. Michael had always been the emotional one, the one who cried at movies and remembered birthdays. I was the analytical one, the one who kept his feelings locked away behind layers of professional detachment. But professional detachment wasn't helping me now. "Come stay with us," Michael said finally. "Lisa's making that lasagna you like, and the kids miss their uncle. I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I leave this house, if I go somewhere else and pretend everything's normal for a few hours, I might convince myself this isn't happening, and I need this to be happening. That doesn't make sense. It does to me." After I hung up, I went back inside and did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. When had I gotten so thin? When had those lines appeared around my eyes? When had my hair started going gray at the temples? I looked like my father had at 42, respectable and unremarkable. Dad had worked at the same insurance company for 30 years, came home every night at 5:30, read the paper, watched the news, and went to bed at 10 p.m. He'd been a good man, a reliable man, a predictable man. And he'd died at 63 without ever having lived a single extraordinary day. Was that who I'd become? Was that why Elena had turned to Thomas? The thought should have made me angry, but instead, it made me curious. For the first time since yesterday's confession, I wanted to understand rather than just blame. What had driven Elena to risk everything we'd built together? What had Thomas offered that I couldn't? I pulled out my laptop and did something I'd never done before. I looked up Thomas on social media. He was easy to find. His profile's public and filled with photos of weekend adventures, ski trips, concerts, art gallery openings. His smile was broad and genuine in every picture. The smile of someone who squeezed every drop of juice from life. In the photos from the company Christmas party, I found Elena. She was laughing at something Thomas was saying, her head thrown back in genuine delight. I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to remember the last time I'd made her laugh like that. I couldn't. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Elena hadn't just betrayed our marriage, she'd escaped from it. She'd found something I'd stopped giving her years ago, joy, that afternoon. I drove to the university where I'd gotten my doctorate. The campus looked smaller than I remembered, but the psychology building was exactly the same. I found Professor Martinez in her office, still surrounded by towers of books and journal articles, still wearing the same kind of chunky jewelry she'd favored 20 years ago. "James," she said, looking up from her papers with surprise, "what brings you here?" "Need to remember something," I said. "What's that?" "Why I became a psychologist in the first place." She gestured to the chair across from her desk, the same chair where I'd sat as a graduate student, full of questions and theories about human behavior. "Tell me what's happening." So I did. I told her about Elena, about Thomas, about the slow death of my marriage by 1,000 small comforts. I told her about the man I'd become and the man I used to be. Professor Martinez listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, her expression thoughtful. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember your dissertation?" she asked finally. "Of course, psychological factors in relationship dissolution." I thought back to those intense months of research and writing, when I'd been passionate about understanding why relationships failed, that most relationships don't end because of dramatic betrayals or incompatibilities, but because the partners stop growing individually and therefore stop growing together. And what did you conclude was the solution? Continuous self-examination and conscious effort to maintain individual identity within the partnership. The words came back to me as if I'd written them yesterday. When was the last time you examined yourself, James? Really examined who you are and who you want to become? The question hung in the air between us. I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped growing, stopped questioning, stopped becoming. I'd achieved professional success and domestic stability, and I'd mistaken that for a life well lived. "Elena didn't just betray you," Professor Martinez said gently. "She broke free from a cage you'd both built around yourselves. The question is, what are you going to do with your freedom?" I left the university with more questions than answers. But for the first time since Elena's confession, the questions felt productive rather than destructive. I wasn't just asking why anymore, I was asking what next. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cooked, not just heated up leftovers or ordered takeout, but actually cooked. I made pasta from scratch, the way my Italian grandmother had taught me when I was 12. I opened a bottle of good wine, not the cheap stuff Elena and I usually bought. I put on music, jazz from the collection I'd abandoned when Elena complained it was too depressing. As I stirred the sauce and listened to Miles Davis, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt like myself. Not Elena's husband, not Dr. Morrison, the forensic psychologist, not Michael's responsible older brother. Just James. Just me. The pasta was perfect. The wine was perfect. The music was perfect. And I was eating alone in my kitchen. And somehow that was perfect too. A text from Elena, "Can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Yes, but not about us. About who we used to be." Her response came quickly. "What do you mean?" I want to understand. I want to understand you. Understand me. Understand how we got here. But I don't want to talk about blame or forgiveness or what happens next. I want to talk about who we were before we became who we are. "Okay," she wrote back. "I'd like that too." I finished my dinner, finished my wine, and went to bed in the guest room. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up at 3 a.m. with anxiety clawing at my chest. For the first time in years, I woke up curious about what the day would bring. Elena was already at the coffee shop when I arrived the next morning, sitting in a different booth this time, one by the window where the morning light made her hair glow auburn. She looked tired, but more relaxed than she had yesterday, as if telling the truth had lifted some invisible weight from her shoulders. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "Thank you for being honest yesterday. It hurt, but I needed to hear it." She nodded, stirring sugar into her coffee. "I've been thinking about what you texted, about who we used to be. And do you remember our third date? We went to that awful poetry reading at the bookstore downtown." I smiled, despite everything. The guy who read that 40-minute epic about his relationship with his motorcycle. "You were so angry afterward. You said poetry should be about truth and beauty and the human condition, not narcissistic rambling about inanimate objects." I was passionate about everything then. You had opinions about art and music and philosophy. You'd argue with me about whether Freud was a genius or a fraud. You'd stay up all night reading and then call me at 6 a.m. because you'd discovered some new theory that explained everything. When did I stop doing that? I don't know. Gradually, I think. Life got in the way. Work got demanding. We bought the house. And suddenly, every conversation was about mortgage payments and home repairs and whether we needed a new water heater. And you missed the old me. I missed the old us. We used to challenge each other. We used to grow together. Somewhere along the way, we started just existing together. I sipped my coffee and watched her face. There was something different about her today, a clarity that hadn't been there yesterday. Is that why you turned to Thomas? Partly, he reminded me of who I used to be. When I'm with him, I feel like the person I was at 25, when everything seemed possible. And what did that person want? Adventure, spontaneity. To feel like life was something that happened to me, not something I endured, the honesty in her voice was devastating and liberating at the same time. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both lost in memories of who we'd been before we'd settled into the comfortable routines that had slowly strangled our marriage. I've been thinking too, I said finally, about my part in this. James, you don't have to. Yes, I do, because you're right. I became predictable. I became safe. I stopped challenging you, stopped challenging myself. I built a life around security and stability. And I forgot that you needed more than that. We both did. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I never wanted to hurt you. I know. But hurt was inevitable once we stopped seeing each other. Really seeing each other. What do we do now? The question hung between us like a bridge we were both afraid to cross. Yesterday, I would have begged her to end it with Thomas, to come home, to try to fix what we'd broken. Today, I understood that fixing wasn't possible. We couldn't go back to who we'd been, because who we'd been hadn't worked. I think, I said carefully, we need to figure out who we are as individuals before we can figure out who we are together. If we are together, are you saying you want a divorce? I'm saying I want us both to be honest about what we need. You need to explore whatever this is with Thomas. I need to rediscover who I am when I'm not just your husband. A separation. A conscious separation. Not a trial separation while we wait to see if our marriage can be saved, but a deliberate choice to give ourselves space to grow. Elena was quiet for a long time, turning her coffee cup in her hands. I don't know if I can ask you to wait for me. I'm not asking you to ask me to wait. I'm asking you to give me the same freedom you've given yourself. The freedom to discover what I want, who I want to be. If we discover we don't want the same things, then we'll know, and we'll both be better for the knowing. We talked for another hour, working out the practical details with the kind of calm discussion that had been impossible when we were trying to save our marriage. Elena would stay at Rebecca's for now. I would keep the house. We would split our time with mutual friends, though we both acknowledged that most of our social life had been built around being a couple, and we'd probably lose some people in the process. When we left the coffee shop, Elena hugged me goodbye. It was the first time we'd touched in months that felt genuine rather than obligatory. I do love you, she said against my shoulder. I love you too. That's why I'm letting you go. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life, but also the most transformative. I threw myself into rediscovering who I was beyond the roles I'd been playing for years. I started reading philosophy again, stayed up late devouring books by authors I'd loved in graduate school. I took up photography, something I'd abandoned in my 20s when it seemed too impractical for a serious professional. I began writing. Again, too, not just case reports and professional analyses, but personal reflections on the psychology of relationships, on the ways people lose themselves in the comfortable routines of long-term partnerships. The writing was raw and honest in a way my academic work had never been. Most importantly, I started therapy with Dr. Rebecca Chen, a colleague I'd always respected but never thought I'd need professionally. The irony of a psychologist needing therapy wasn't lost on me, but Rebecca helped me understand that self-knowledge and self-healing weren't the same thing. You've spent your career analyzing other people's relationships, she said during one session. When did you last analyze your own patterns? I thought I was self-aware. Professional awareness and personal insight are different skills. You can diagnose a patient's depression without recognizing your own. She was right. I'd been so focused on understanding others that I'd stopped examining myself. Through our sessions, I began to see the patterns Elena had tried to tell me about my tendency to choose safety over growth, comfort over challenge, predictability over passion. I also began to understand something else. I hadn't just lost myself. In our marriage, I'd been losing myself long before Elena, gradually choosing the path of least resistance in every area of my life. The promotion I'd taken 2 years ago wasn't what I'd wanted, it was what was expected. The house we'd bought wasn't where I'd wanted to live, it was the sensible choice. Even the career I'd built was more about meeting others' expectations than following my own passion. One evening, about 6 weeks after our separation began, I was in my study working on a piece about the psychology of midlife transitions when my phone rang. "I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. My heart clenched. "You're moving in with Thomas?" "No." I ended it with Thomas. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been preparing myself for the opposite news, for the call where she told me she was filing for divorce. Why? Because I realized something. I wasn't in love with Thomas. I was in love with who I became when I was with him. But that person wasn't sustainable. She was built on deception and guilt and the thrill of doing something forbidden. "Elena, let me finish. I also realized that I can't go back to who I was before. I can't pretend that these past few months didn't teach me something important. About myself? About what I need? What do you need? I need to be with someone who challenges me. Someone who sees me as more than just a wife or a partner, but as an individual with her own dreams and ambitions. Someone who pushes me to grow. And you don't think I can be that person? I don't know, but I'd like to find out, if you're willing." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd had in years. We talked about our fears, our dreams, our individual goals. Elena told me she'd been accepted into a graduate program in art therapy, something she'd applied for months ago, but never mentioned. I told her about the book I was writing, about the photography project I'd started documenting the changing neighborhoods of our city. We were different people than we'd been 6 weeks ago, and for the first time in years, that felt like a good thing. "I don't want to move back in immediately," Elena said. "I like who I'm becoming when I'm on my own. I don't want to lose that. I don't want you to lose it either. But I'd like to start dating, really dating, not just resuming our marriage, but getting to know who we are now." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Dating my wife, learning to see her as an individual rather than just my partner. Allowing her to see me as more than just the reliable, predictable man I'd become. Like that too, I said. Our first date was awkward and wonderful. We met at a gallery opening Elena's suggestion, and spent the evening discussing the artwork with the kind of passion we'd once brought to our early conversations about philosophy and psychology. She'd cut her hair shorter, and she was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, red and bold in a way that reminded me of the woman I'd fallen in love with. "You look different," I said, as we walked to a wine bar after the gallery. "I feel different, more like myself. I like it. Good, because this is who I am now, not who I was when we were just going through the motions." The wine bar was crowded and loud, the kind of place we would have avoided during our married routine. But tonight, the energy felt electric. We had to lean close to hear each other, our conversations intimate and intense. "I've been thinking about something," Elena said, her hand resting on mine across the small table. "What's that?" "About the difference between loving someone and being in love with someone. And I think I loved you for the past few years, but I wasn't in love with you. I think you loved me too, but we both forgot what it felt like to be in love." And now she squeezed my hand. "Now I'm remembering." The kiss that followed was our first real kiss in months, maybe years. Not the perfunctory goodnight kisses we'd exchanged out of habit, but a kiss full of discovery and desire, and the recognition that we were choosing each other all over again. We didn't sleep together that night. We weren't ready for that level of intimacy yet. Instead, we talked until 3 a.m. in my car outside Rebecca's apartment, sharing dreams and fears like teenagers on a first date. "I want to take things slowly," Elena said, as she prepared to go inside. "Me too. I want to earn you again, and I want to earn you." The next few months were a revelation. We dated once a week, sometimes twice, exploring our city like tourists, trying new restaurants, attending concerts and lectures and art shows. We discovered that we both loved jazz, something we'd never explored together during our marriage. We found out that Elena had a talent for wine tasting, and that I had strong opinions about modern architecture. We also discovered that we fought differently now, instead of the silent resentments that had characterized our married arguments. We had passionate debates about art and politics and life choices. We disagreed about things we'd never discussed before, and instead of feeling threatening, the disagreements felt energizing. "You're different," my brother Michael said when I brought Elena to his daughter's birthday party, 6 months after our separation began. "How so?" "You single quotes, alive, both of you. You look at each other like you're seeing each other for the first time." He was right. We were seeing each other for the first time. The people we'd become during our separation were different from the people who'd built our marriage on compromise and comfort. These new people were more challenging, more demanding, more passionate. They were also more interesting. Elena moved back home after 8 months, but it felt more like moving in together for the first time than resuming our old life. We'd both changed the house during our separation. I converted the basement into a darkroom for my photography, and Elena had claimed the spare bedroom as an art studio. We were sharing space while maintaining our individual identities. "I'm scared," Elena admitted the night before she moved back in. "Of what?" "Of falling back into our old patterns. Of losing who I've become." "Then we won't let that happen." How do we prevent it? By staying conscious. By continuing to challenge each other. By remembering that love isn't about finding someone you can live with, but finding someone you can't live without. The transition wasn't perfect. We had moments of tension, times when the old patterns tried to reassert themselves, but we'd learned to recognize the warning signs, to call each other out when one of us started retreating into comfortable predictability. A year after Elena's confession in the coffee shop, we were sitting in the same booth where our marriage had nearly ended. This time, we were celebrating Elena had just received her master's degree in art therapy, and my book about the psychology of midlife transformation had been accepted for publication. "Do you ever think about Thomas?" I asked. "Sometimes, not romantically, but I think about what he represented. The permission to want more from life. Do you regret what happened?" Elena considered the question carefully. "I regret the betrayal. I regret the lies, but I don't regret the wake-up call. If I hadn't had that affair, we might have spent the rest of our lives sleepwalking through a marriage that looked successful from the outside, but was slowly dying from within. And now I feel like we're building something real, not just a marriage, but a partnership between two whole people who choose each other every day." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I choose you. I choose you too." 2 years later, I sat in my office at the university. I'd left my forensic psychology position to return to teaching and research, working on my second book. This one was about the possibility of transformation within long-term relationships, about the ways couples could break free from destructive patterns and rediscover passion without destroying what they'd built together. The book was based on our story, but also on the stories of dozens of other couples I'd interviewed, people who'd found ways to grow individually while staying together. The research was groundbreaking, but it was also deeply personal. Elena knocked on my office door, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing paint-stained jeans from her morning art therapy session with teenage clients. "How's the writing going?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Good. I'm working on the conclusion." "What's your main point?" "That most people think relationships are about finding the right person, but really, they're about becoming the right person, and continuing to become the right person even after you've found someone to love." Elena smiled, the kind of smile that had made me fall in love with her twice. I like us, I said. "Me too." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our coffee and watching the students walk across the campus quad outside my window. They looked so young, so certain that love was about finding someone who completed them. Maybe someday they'd learn what we'd learned, that love wasn't about completion, but about continuous creation. "I have something to tell you," Elena said. Heart-skipped muscle memory from that day in the coffee shop 2 years ago. "What's that?" "I got the job." "The job?" "The director position at the youth counseling center." "I got it." I jumped up and pulled her into my arms, spinning her around my small office until we were both laughing. I'm so proud of you, I said. Are you okay with the travel requirement? I'll be gone 2 weeks a month, setting up new programs in different cities. 2 years ago, I would have been threatened by Elena's success, worried about how her career advancement might affect our relationship. Now, I was just proud. I'm more than okay with it. I'm excited for you, really. Really? Really? Besides, absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? And it gives us something to talk about when I get back. We kissed in my office like teenagers, not caring who might see us through the window. When we broke apart, I saw my reflection in her eyes, and for the first time in years, I recognized the person looking back at me. He was older, wiser, more complicated than the man I'd been at 20, but he was also more real, more fully himself. That evening, we went to the jazz club downtown, the same one where we'd had our second first date. The music was incredible, the wine was perfect, and Elena was wearing the red dress she'd worn to our first gallery opening. I love you, I said as we swayed to the music. I love you too. No, I said, pulling back to look at her. I mean, I'm in love with you still. Again. Always. She smiled and pulled me closer. I'm in love with you too. The difference between loving someone and being in love with them, we'd learned it the hard way. But we'd learned it, and now, every day, we chose to fall in love with each other all over again. Some stories end with happily ever after. Ours ended with consciously ever after, the understanding that love isn't a destination but a practice. Not a feeling but a choice, not a completion but a continuous creation. And in that creation, we'd found not just each other, but ourselves.